Hello and welcome to or back to my channel. I am Kit, your friendly feminist cat lady spinster, and today we are going to be talking about Lauren Chen's Childless Feminist Mad, Declining Fertility Rates and Why We Can't Talk About It. I just kind of felt I should weigh in as a childless feminist and see what Lauren has to say because, well, as a woman, maybe it's just because I filmed my Make Women Great Again video yesterday, but it feels like people are talking to me about my fertility or lack of all the time. So anyway, of course, Lauren does not provide sources for the articles she speaks of in this video, but no worries, I will link them, plus another one that I found below. Did I find a fourth? I don't remember, but if I do, I'll link everything down below. All right. I guess you should jump into it.
But no, I'm not just talking about people who disagree with me. I'm talking about frantic, hysteric, and sometimes threatening outrage over just simply having an opinion or trying to talk about a certain issue.
All right, so I cut out Lauren's strange rant about how the left began using triggered late and incorrectly because I really don't think it matters. And for the record, from Lauren's own definition that she just gave us, I saw no one frantic, hysteric, or threatening when discussing the subject. The tweets that she mentioned were fine, and the articles she mentioned, they disagreed with Dorothy Burns' decision and laid their objections out in a rational manner. If anyone is triggered here, it's actually Lauren.
And similarly, when it comes to feminists, our topic for the day, if you mention anything having to do with marriage rates, the fact that men tend to prefer to date women a little bit younger than themselves.
So no one cares when a man wants to date someone 2, 3, 5 years younger than him. In fact, I would say that's probably pretty normal. But when the age difference becomes like a 35-year-old dating a 20-year-old, yeah, then people, not just feminists, tend to have opinions about that.
Or fertility rates, oh goodness, are you in for it? They will definitely give you a piece of their mind. And I recently experienced that myself not too long ago when I posted this observation to Twitter. I wrote, in the waiting room at the obstetrician, almost all the pregnant women here look to be late 30s or early 40s. Just me and a couple others appear to be in our 20s. Very interesting.
Yeah, wait till you see how Twitter dogpiled on her for this one. The tweets she's going to show in response, you might want to take your children out of the room.
So regarding my post, I thought the implications of my observation were pretty obvious, but I'll state them outright here just so we're all on the same page. In North America, at least, and I think the same holds true for really most developed nations, it really is a pattern that women are having babies later and later. And I'm not saying that, mothers are having their babies in their 20s and then continuing into their 30s, maybe even 40s. I mean that women are just not having babies in their 20s as often as they used to. And the reason why I think this is worth bringing up isn't to shame any individual person. It's because, yes, fertility rates do have a huge effect on our society. When we look at things like Social Security or just in general retirement plans across different countries, yeah, a lot of them do depend on younger generations continuing to pay into the tax system, which is admittedly why some people do refer to Social Security as a Ponzi scheme. And not only that, but it also has implications for the labor market. And in fact, the low birth rates across the Western world are often used as justification for mass migration, i.e. since native people or existing residents in countries aren't having enough children, we need to import new people so that we can continue to have enough workers and taxpayers supporting the system.
So is Lauren against immigration? I thought I was watching Lauren Chen, not Lauren Southern.
Like, this isn't me just trying to be nosy and probe into people's lives. Families and really children are the building blocks of society. So yes, this absolutely matters. It's an important conversation to have.
I agree. And I look forward to hearing what solutions Lauren proposes.
But according to Twitter feminists, no, this is just sexism. As one person who really just calls herself the transformed feminist wrote, women in their 30s and 40s are pregnant, yay for them, assuming that they want babies, of course. Some women in their 20s aren't sitting in the OB's office, also yay, assuming that's their choice, of course.
So what was wrong with that response? I saw nothing hysteric, nothing threatening, nothing was said about sexism. I feel like Lauren is really reaching here.
Again, definitely not looking to blame any individual woman for her choice, but when we're talking about things like the impact to society in our countries, we can't really just brush everything off as, oh, people making individual choices. For example, if tomorrow everybody in the country simply chose to stop going to university to study medicine, that would be a bad thing. Not that we would want to shame individual people for not wanting to be doctors, but it's like, okay, someone needs to be a doctor, right? Someone needs to fulfill this role. And the exact same thing is true with being a mother or father. We need people to do that.
Yeah, but going to school to become a doctor is very different from becoming a parent.
And something else that a lot of people brought up was that, well, maybe the birth rates in Western countries are just getting later and later because of financial difficulties. Like this one person very snarkily replied, people with financial stability in their 20s berate people. I don't know who was doing any berating.
So once again, I saw nothing triggered in that response, nor did they say anything about sexism, nor did they seem really snarky to me. They're just pointing out a fact. And maybe Lauren just posts on Twitter and she doesn't wade through it that much. But I have seen a lot, not just on Twitter, but in life in general, about how, if you have kids, well, companies shouldn't have to offer paid parental leave because the company shouldn't suffer because you chose to have kids. And in my country, at least, the United States, it has been made pretty clear that you are on your own. If something horrible happens and you suffer financial hardship for any reason, you are on your own. There is no village that will help you out.
Who worked an extra 10 years for the same stability for having children later. I agree you should have children while you're young and healthy, but more importantly, you should have children when you can properly provide. So the idea that fertility rates are dropping and people are having children later and later because of financial difficulties that specifically are worse when you're younger, it kind of doesn't really make sense when you look at the breakdown of who exactly is having children both globally and even within developed countries. Globally, it's simply a fact that the less developed a country is, actually the higher, not the lower, the birth rate tends to be. And yeah, some people will attribute this to, oh, well, they just can't afford things like contraception, but I think there's also a cultural aspect here that we are simply not talking about. It's not just that people aren't having children or as many children because we can't afford them. People are making a conscious decision, and I'm not going to be shaming, again, individuals, but it's something we should talk about, to have a more luxurious lifestyle as opposed to investing some of that money in having children. Even in America, when we look at the birth rate broken down by household income, we see that households earning between $35,000 to $50,000 per year are more likely to have kids or have more kids than households earning $200,000 per year or more. Like, obviously, financial planning is important. It's super important. Anytime I make videos like this discussing fertility rates, I'll always have people who strawman me saying, oh, so you want just teenagers to be popping out babies? And it's
no, Lauren wants the educated upper classes to have more babies. I see where she's going with this.
Like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. You either pop out a kid when you're 16 and have a part-time job, or you wait until you're 45. Yeah, there's like absolutely no middle ground there whatsoever. Thank you for clearly contributing so much to this discourse. Yeah, it's just there's a lot of things said whenever I bring up this conversation. But to be clear, this isn't something that I'm just trying to fearmonger about. This is a well-established problem. And as Statistics Canada reports, and I'm using Canadian statistics because these were just the most well laid out ones I could find, but I'm sure there are similar numbers going on for countries like the US, Australia, and the UK. Quote, Canada's total fertility rate has been falling since 2009 from 1.68 children per woman to 1.54 in 2016, the lowest level observed since 2003. And just to be clear, the replacement fertility rate is 2 point something. And I think I read somewhere that for at least the past 40 years, Canada's fertility rate has been below replacement levels. It also continues the gap between the fertility rate of women aged 30 to 34 years and those aged 25 to 29 years continued to widen between 2012 and 2016, a result of decreasing fertility rates among women aged 25 to 29. So again, not only is it just more older women getting pregnant, which is not a bad thing at all. I mean, sure, after 35, complications in pregnancies do become more statistically significant, but I mean, that doesn't mean that, once you're 30, eggs are dried up, can't have a baby. Absolutely not. That's not what I'm trying to say. And I think that's not really what anybody is trying to say outside of maybe like a few select like incel manosphere types.
Right. So there was a bit about this in one of the other articles I found about the fertility classes, and it says, studies show there's a 1 in 3 chance a woman will get pregnant at each cycle in her 20s compared with a 1 in 5 chance in her 30s. Over a year, roughly 82% of women trying to get pregnant will succeed when the mother is aged up to 39, according to a 2004 French study. By the age of 41, the statistics are less favorable, but women still have a 40 to 50% chance of natural conception, according to Dr. Nick Rain-Fenning, consultant gynecologist at the University of Nottingham. There is no cliff at all, it's more of a very gradual decline. If you're 36, for instance, it might just take you a bit longer to get pregnant than if you were in your late 20s, but it doesn't mean you won't. The article also says, the increase of conditions like Down syndrome is a lot higher over the age of 40, but when you compare 30 to 35-year-old mothers with those aged 35 to 40, there's not a huge difference.
But no, yeah, just women in their 20s not having kids as often as they used to. And this has gone to the point that, quote, the fertility rate of women aged 35 to 39 years continued to rise up to 56 births per 1,000 women in 2016. It has been higher than the fertility rate of women aged 20 to 24 since 2010, which has been falling. So to be clear, at least in Canada, you are more likely as a woman to give birth between 35 to 39 years old than you are between 20 to 24 years old. And one last fact to mention is that the average age of mothers at first birth was 28.7 years in 2012 and 29.2 years in 2016. It has been rising steadily since the mid-1960s. And so for like the 100th time, nothing wrong with women giving birth when they're older. But the thing is, if you are starting later as a woman, you only maybe have your first kid at 30, just based off of how biology works, it does mean that you simply have less time to have more children than if you had started younger. And sure, for some women, this isn't going to be a problem because maybe you only wanted 2 to 3 kids to begin with. But there are going to be some women out there who maybe would have liked more children, but simply, came up against that wall all in their age where they weren't comfortable trying to get pregnant after a certain point.
I find it really interesting that she says this because, I mean, if you don't yet feel ready to have kids, you really probably shouldn't have kids. I'm just really curious as to what like Lauren's proposed solution to this is, because when you're the one being told, oh, let Jesus take the wheel, or, it's never a good time to have kids, just do it. That's very different being the person receiving that advice and the one giving the advice, because it's a whole lot easier to tell someone to just do something than actually just do it, especially when it's something like kids, which are, a lifelong commitment.
And it's funny, when I posted my tweet about the obstetrician's office, I also had a lot of people bringing up fertility issues as maybe a reason why younger women aren't there at the obstetrician's office, as if for some reason that was like invalidating my observation.
I'm sorry, how did she get here from there?
And when actually, I think the fact that fertility rates are rising is also something to talk about because it really isn't mentioned almost at all. Specifically, here's a really interesting article from Scientific American. It reads, when you see or hear a reference to the 1%, most people think of socioeconomic status, the people with the top 1% of wealth or income in the United States, which is how the term is commonly used in our culture. Not us, though. What we think of is the fact that the whole spectrum of reproductive problems in males are increasing by about 1% per year in Western countries. This 1% effect includes the rates of declining sperm counts, decreasing testosterone levels, and increasing rates of testicular cancer, as well as a rise in the prevalence of erectile dysfunction. On the female side of the equation, miscarriage rates are also increasing by about 1% per year in the US, and so is the rate of gestational surrogacy. Meanwhile, the total fertility rate worldwide has dropped by nearly 1% per year from 1960 to 2018. So when it comes to increases in the rate of infertility among women or women who are trying to become pregnant, I do think that part of it may be due to the fact that women are starting later and later to try to conceive, but I don't think that's even the whole picture here. I know of so many younger couples around my age who had infertility issues when trying to conceive. And honestly, I don't really know what could be behind this on the male or female side, because Liam, my husband, he is really interested in things like testosterone levels and like why it's so low among males today. And I don't think we really know like one single reason that's causing these declines. But yeah, we are more likely just as species, as humans, to be infertile now than we were generations ago. And I think that's concerning. And again, it's something we should be talking about, but we don't. And actually, I really appreciate women, couples in general, who share their infertility struggles, because obviously this is something that is affecting more people, more couples than I think we would imagine. And so yeah, kudos to people who share their stories going through that. More from the article, it continues, when people hear of this, there's often a natural instinct to shrug it off, believing that 1% per year isn't really a big deal. But it's a huge deal. It adds up to more than 10% per decade and more than 50% over 50 years. When you consider that sperm counts declined by 50% in just 40 years, as Shanna's meta-analysis published in a 2017 issue of the journal Human Reproduction Update showed, it's difficult to deny or discount how alarming this is. So we continue to wonder, where is the outrage on this issue? The annual 1% decline in reproductive health is faster than the rate of global warming, thankfully, and yet people are up in arms about global warming, but not about these reproductive health effects. I think that is very well said, but even though the author doesn't seem to understand why we don't talk about things like reproductive health more, I actually very well understand this problem, and I think the reason why we don't talk about it more, frankly, is because feminists get mad when we do.
So Lauren seriously took the question, why aren't we outraged over reproductive health not being discussed more, and boiled down the answer to, because feminists get mad when we do. Oh, I have so many questions. What does it look like when feminists get mad when we talk about reproductive health? Are we allowed to talk about like ovarian cancer and breast cancer and things like that? Or is it just when we talk about like fertility that feminists get mad? Why do you think feminists get mad when you talk about reproductive health? I need some like examples, like articles or lobbying of Congress or something, because I really don't think people are afraid of feminists. I mean, they just wrote an article in the Scientific American talking about it. So clearly the feminists did not scare them off from writing that article. And speaking of the article, so I imagine that people are outraged about climate change because that's something that we can see and feel the effects of, and it will only get worse in the future, and we know we helped cause it. But if you're not struggling with infertility, you're not going to be outraged that infertility struggles are rising worldwide. You probably won't even know. I feel so powerful. I had no idea that I was able to like stop things that I didn't like. But I'm sorry, wait. Is Lauren going down the road of like feminists don't get married, they don't have kids, that's why they're like bitter, dried up old hags who hate when people talk about fertility and marriage and men? Is that what we're doing here?
Yeah, the reason why I'm even making this video in the first place is because I saw 2 different articles on 2 different sites from 2 different writers.
Oh my goodness, 2 whole articles? That's almost like 20, which is almost like 100.
complaining about the fact that a college in the UK will be offering a course talking about childbearing and fertility and all of that. The reason why we don't talk about this issue more is because there are feminists, I mean, mostly feminists, there are ideologues out there who are so sensitive about this issue and who view any discussion as like some judgment on their personal lives that they shut down anything remotely critical of the fact that so few people are having babies nowadays.
So Lauren isn't going to tell us this, but in both articles she mentions, the women give more helpful suggestions about how to raise the birth rate that don't include reminding women to have babies.
Case in point, let's start with this article from The Independent. It's an opinion piece titled, "Women's Fertility is a Forbidden Subject? Since When?" This is very clearly feminist author.
Someone please tell me that Lauren has never claimed to be a journalist, because she is so obviously trying to like guide us to the conclusions she wants us to make from this.
Author writes, Cambridge University's last single-sex college has a new president, Dorothy Byrne, and she's serving up some interesting innovation. As well as classes about consent and harassment, students will learn about their declining fertility and childcare. Wait, what? There must be some nuance here, because this sounds like something from a particularly unimaginative dystopian novel. Let's see what Byrne says about her introduction of pro-natalist seminars. Byrne, a former head of news at Channel 4, reckons that she wants to, quote, empower the women in the college. I mean, she could have asked the women at the college what they would find empowering, but in the absence of that, babies it is. So to reiterate, a college in the UK is simply offering a class about childcare and fertility, and this feminist writer and others clearly have already taken it as some Handmaid's Tale dystopian sign. Like, really?
So I wouldn't go so far as to call it dystopian, but it isn't really something that you pay to go to college for. I would say this belongs more as like a free class at a community center or in a health class in high school, because I think learning more about our bodies is great and useful, but not really something that should be something that you have to pay for in college. And I don't think it really belongs at college either. And also there is the fact that it's not being offered to men as well.
Yeah, I'm sure just simply learning about your biological clock and parenthood really is the same as being forcibly impregnated. I'm glad that we've reached this level of conversation surrounding this very important topic. The article also writes that Burns believes that fertility has become a forbidden subject. Young women are being taught that they all have to do well in school, get a degree, be successful in the career, and be beautiful. The thing that is getting lost along the way is that you forget to have a baby, which I nearly did.
So somewhere in one of the articles, it mentions that this decision came after it was announced that the UK's birth rate had fallen. So I can't decide if she's just projecting or if she's single-handedly trying to save the empire.
Byrne goes on to lament that asking women about her plans for reproduction has become almost forbidden, and that it's seen as old-fashioned and negative to say to girls the things that an older generation used to say, like, are you courting or when are you going to have a baby?
Call me old-fashioned or a prude, but I really think people should never ask someone when they're going to have a baby, because you're essentially asking them when they plan to start having unprotected sex. And that just seems really invasive and uncomfortable.
Okay, so when it comes to questions like this, I do understand that there is a fine line between showing interest in a person's life and simply trying to encourage family values versus shaming people for maybe a decision that isn't even in their control. For example, if it's due to something like infertility or just not being able to find someone you want to have a baby with. I'm not unaware of that potential conflict. It's definitely real. And the last thing that I would want to do to anybody is make them feel like they have a hard and fast deadline or kind of pressure them into a choice that they don't want to make, like into marrying someone they don't really want to marry so they can have kids, even though, you know, if they were under less pressure, maybe they would have made different choices. That's not what I want. But there's been an overcorrection in society, I've got to admit. I mean, it's gotten to the point where I, at least as someone who, you know, is a woman and who does have a job, I've actually had people, I'm sure with good intentions, try to convince me not to have kids because, I mean, the way they put it is we were in a room with a bunch of other people in the political commentary sphere, and they actually said, well, just look around you. No one here has kids. Doesn't that tell you something? And it's like, I appreciate they were telling me these things because they do value my work and they don't want to see me essentially drop out of the workforce. But still, like, I do feel like it's more acceptable to say stuff like that than to simply ask someone, so when do you want kids? And I don't think that should be the case.
Well, I can at least agree with Lauren on that.
In response to this premise, though, this writer writes, I'll tell you what, though. I wish asking women about babies was forbidden. I long for the day when strangers and acquaintances don't feel entitled to ask me about my reproductive choices. The idea that a woman of any age could forget about babies, what with the constant reminders about biological clocks and you need to get a move on encouragements from medical professionals and family members alike, would be laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Now, I would sympathize with this particular author if we hadn't on this very channel covered so many different stories of women, I don't want to say forgetting to have babies, but yes, reaching a point in their life where they want to have babies, but either the dating opportunities or biological opportunities simply aren't there anymore. So maybe for individual feminists, for individual women, you feel like there is a constant hounding to have babies and, deadline, et cetera, but just know that overall, that is not the norm for most women, as I think is evidenced by the fact that you do hear, for example, of even famous celebrities doing things like having surrogacy without a husband or having to go through IVF treatments just to become mothers. Like, this is a problem. This happens. Pretending that it doesn't help anybody, and it certainly doesn't help women.
I find it kind of interesting that Lauren assumes the celebrities ran out of time and that's why they had to use a surrogate, and not that it was the plan all along. But maybe it's because I'm not a professional that I don't understand how you can forget to have a baby. For a woman, it does take a lot of planning to have a kid because you have to take time off work, and then there's all the consequences of that. And in the US, at least, there is no sympathy for people who have kids.
This writer then says, now I've got a cutting edge idea. It might be a bit avant-garde, so bear with me. How about we stop browbeating women with yet another life deadline, and if we really want young women to have kids, concentrate on the infrastructural issues that might make motherhood seem more appealing. It's at this point that the author then tries to push for things like universal childcare, et cetera, all of these essentially big government handouts because, hey, maybe those will make the fertility rates better. That so far has not been the case. I mean, provinces like Quebec, where I live, they have tried things, a lot of different handouts. Same is true for the Scandinavian countries. There are a lot of incentives for people to have kids.
So I find it telling that she chose to cut this part out and just give a very, very brief overview of what the author wrote and then just dismiss it with, well, Scandinavian countries tried that and it didn't work, so clearly we shouldn't bother with it. And considering how thin the United States safety net is, I think if we implemented some of these, it might make a difference. Maybe not a big one to get us back up to the replacement level of 2.1, but at least a bit of a bounce to, 1.7 or wherever. So this is what Lauren cut out. Given that women continue to be the primary caregivers for children, that women have to plan for maternity leave and career breaks, that childcare continues to be prohibitively expensive, that women are more likely to have to take part-time jobs or lower-paid jobs flexible enough to fit with childcare, and that single mothers are far more likely to experience poverty than any other group, it seems to me like there are more pressing social issues here than teaching women about their declining fertility.
But as I mentioned before, with the income charts and fertility rates just being higher in developing countries than developed countries, maybe for individuals, they might say that financial concerns are a reason they're postponing having kids. But I mean, that's not what the data tells us.
So is the takeaway here supposed to be that we're just too selfish and want to just keep amassing money instead of investing in family and other things that make life worthwhile? Is that what we're supposed to take away from this?
And then we finish off with this lovely anti-natalist sentiment. And this is all assuming that a declining birth rate is a bad thing. Or is it more about whose birth rates are in decline? Is it a coincidence that it is women of privilege at Cambridge University who are being ushered into motherhood? Reproduction is central to dominant narratives around social hierarchies. We should ask ourselves a key question. Who do we want to have more babies? I mean, this person is trying to make it into some evil conspiracy theory.
No, she's asking a question.
The idea that, we should want women in college to have babies. One of the best predictors of the education level that a child will go on to attain is the mother's education level. So I don't think it's a bad thing that women in college specifically would be given classes and information about childcare and fertility. I mean, I think what we should want to avoid as a society is something like Idiocracy, where in the beginning of the film, it's actually very scary, but also concerningly realistic, where the smartest, the most educated, the wealthiest, they are so cautious. They're like, oh, well, we'll just wait for kids, not really the right time. We're moving, Mercury's in retrograde, not a good time for us. Meanwhile, people who are much less affluent and much less educated, they're just popping out kids. And it's like, that we need to do something about that. That's not good for the long-term effects of the country. And then the second article that I saw, which essentially parrots the same talking point, so I'm not really going to go through all of it. It's from The Guardian, and it's titled, Women Are Still Being Blamed for Society's Problems with Fertility. So this author mentions a lot of the same things that the previous author does, that, oh, what are you talking about? Women are constantly reminded of fertility. If you want women to have more babies, why don't you improve social services, yada, yada, yada. The only thing that I will say is different, and that I actually agree with this author about, is that no, it is not simply women's burden or responsibility to have kids. I know it's not popular to say nowadays, but parenthood does take two to tango. You need a woman and a man, and any and all, let's say, societal encouragement, because I don't want to say pressures that are applied to women to have children, I think absolutely should apply to men as well.
So I do agree with Lauren that if you're going to put pressure on women to have kids, you need to put pressure on men as well, because I mean, a woman cannot make a baby alone unless she has the money to do IVF and all that, which from my understanding is not cheap. I think as a society, we've become so used to hearing that, women have a set deadline to have kids that we just don't really think about what happens when men delay family planning. We just don't really think about what happens when men delay family planning, and it's becoming more talked about now. Both articles she mentions does have a mention about men, and also so did the one that I found had a few paragraphs about the issues with men delaying fatherhood. So it is becoming more talked about now, but it's still mainly seen as a woman's problem.
But see, the reason why I don't think that happens is frankly because fatherhood is just held in such low regard these days, which is heartbreaking. But I think men, like women in general, should aspire to become a father like women aspire to become a mother. Parenthood in general, it's a beautiful part of life. And it saddens me that, yeah, they've almost been excluded from the conversation in general as men. And in fact, these two feminist writers talking about, well, how do we make motherhood more appealing to women? Well, frankly, I think marriage plays a huge part of that. As someone who is currently pregnant, I can't imagine going through this without my husband. And never mind the fact that when it comes to childhood poverty rates, the figures are so much higher for single mothers. If we want to encourage a child-friendly home life for women, then yeah, we should be encouraging marriage too. But we can't do that either because, yeah, that's right, once more feminism.
So much like one accuses someone of being a thief, she accuses these two writers of being feminists and says that we can't encourage marriage among women because of feminism. And fun fact, both of these writers she was talking about are married.
Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say for now.
Okay, well, that was an abrupt ending to the video. I'm not really very knowledgeable about Lauren Chen, so should I not be surprised that she didn't offer any solutions or proposals to fix this situation? Or is it, I guess she's just kind of like an outrage producer, which might be why she kept using the word feminist to try and get her audience riled up about those damn feminists just ruining everything. Anyway, so I had a few things that I wrote down. So in generations past, you can see most of them had a lot of kids, but kids were kind of unavoidable back then unless you wanted to remain celibate, and kids were also an asset to the family, helping out with the farm and family store and all that stuff. And I think the fact that women began having less kids once birth control became widely available tells us that no, it's not natural for women to want so many kids or even any at all. It's just now we have the technology to be able to choose when and if we procreate. And now humans will have to figure out a way to deal with this because forcing or guilting women into having kids isn't the way. And I find this video really strange because as an American, I see a lot of don't have kids you can't afford. So yeah, that makes people cautious about having kids. They know our safety net is mostly see-through. And when people do the responsible thing and wait until they feel they can afford to have kids, then they're accused of contributing to the downfall of society as we know it. And I'm sorry, Lauren, but this is ridiculous. You saw two opinion pieces and jumped to feminists become outraged when we talk about fertility rates. That's why we don't talk about fertility? Come on. Also, I'm just jumping in before I run off to edit this video, but is it just me, or is it really kind of suspicious when someone tries to pin all the blame for something on one group of people? It's because of feminists that we have this problem. I don't know, I just find that really uncomfortable and suspicious. So I guess the takeaway here is supposed to be that feminism is ruining society. We can't tell women they have a fertility timer because feminism. We can't tell women to get married because feminism, even though feminists get married. We can't tell men their fertility isn't indefinite because I'm sure feminism causes that too. And Lauren provides no solutions, just shallow outrage. Well, I guess since those Scandinavian solutions didn't work, we should just resort to pressure and shame. I still think in the US we could be doing things to support parents much more than we do, so people won't feel as though they're teetering on the precipice of ruin if they have kids. There's a lot more I could say about this, but I feel like Lauren doesn't really deserve it, so anyway, please feel free to comment below and let me know what you think of Lauren's whatever she just did. And if you liked my content, please feel free to like and subscribe. That really helps me out, especially in the algorithm. And yeah, I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.